All right, welcome back to the FITSNews studio. This is the last week in review before the partisan primary elections here in South Carolina. So we've got a lot of political news to cover. We're going to start off with a major fight in the South Carolina Democratic Party. We're going to cover a Blackface scandal. We're also going to go into some news on the congressional race that's drawn attention down in the Low Country, as well as a few other local races of note. In addition to that, we've got some updates on the Murdaugh murders, crime and corruption saga. We've got information related to jailhouse calls and speculation about the timing of murder indictments in this high-profile case. Beyond that, we're going to look at the Bowen Turner saga. We've got some updates there. And we're also going to talk about local government, particularly school boards, and a glaring lack of transparency with hundreds of thousands of dollars of your tax money. All that and much more heading your way on the Week in Review. Big week in South Carolina politics, folks. We're going to start with the Democratic gubernatorial primary, which, by the way, was not even a race. No one was paying attention to this thing until this news outlet busted this party wide open. We wrote a story 2 weeks ago talking about how there were no televised debates scheduled for this election, which pits former U.S. Congressman Joe Cunningham against State Senator Mia McLeod. Now, why would there be no televised debates? And, oh, by the way, why would the Democratic Party also not put any ballot questions on the ballot to try to draw turnout or do anything to try to draw attention to this election? It's like they didn't want anyone to know what was happening. Why? Well, I thought about that and did some research and found out there's a very good reason. The reason is that the Democratic establishment in South Carolina wants Joe Cunningham, who, by the way, is this lily white guy. Literally go to Urban Dictionary and look up the cracker. We got this guy, Joe Cunningham, Kentucky native, self-proclaimed ocean engineer, although he didn't have an ocean engineering degree. Anyway, this guy running against State Senator Mia McLeod, who is actually a Democrat and who is actually, yes, black, in a party where 6 out of 10 primary voters are black. And, oh, wait a minute. There we go. Now we see what's happening. There are no televised debates, people, because the party establishment doesn't want black voters to know that, yes, a black candidate is running for this office. In fact, Mia McLeod, the first black woman to seek the gubernatorial nomination on the Democratic side. So we published this story about the lack of debates. It blew up. Tons of mainstream media coverage, tons of social media coverage, and all of a sudden people are paying attention to this race. Not only does Cunningham have to agree to debate Mia McLeod, which they're going to do roughly 4 days before the primary, but all of a sudden this race is all anybody's talking about. And I thought this thing had already elevated to a high level, but it blew completely out of the water this last week. And I want to walk through what happened because we've got some hilarious tweets to show here that are going to showcase exactly how crazy things get in Palmetto politics. It started when Joe Cunningham, who was obviously stung by the fact that people are now aware that there's a black opponent running against him, he runs out and tries to get the first black endorsement that he can get, right? He gets House Minority Leader Todd Rutherford to come endorse his campaign because, again, if you're a white person running in the Democratic Party, you need to put your arms around as many black people as possible. So Cunningham does that, has Todd Rutherford endorse him, but I don't think that Rutherford was expecting the blowback he would get. Now, I want to go here. This is a clip from the take that we did earlier this week where it goes through the tit for tat on this exchange. I want to cut to that real quick. Let's take a look at that. Birds of a feather. Good old Todd endorses Joe because I refused to appoint his unqualified new wife as a Richland County magistrate. Wow. Okay, now that's pretty bold, but Mia was just getting warmed up, people. The incumbent state senator said now Rutherford can go back to barely holding on as minority leader, funding his mother-in-law's nonprofit with state tax money, and using the state plane as his personal vehicle. These are bombs. People, these are bombs being dropped, but it actually gets better. My mic's actually dropping out. It actually gets better. Here's the next follow-up from Mia McLeod. She said, and I quote, "Next time, Todd, you probably shouldn't cheat with and marry the babysitter." How's that for disrespecting black women? Wow, man. Wow. All right, so that was the beginning of the saga, but it actually didn't end there because the day after our report ran, Minority Leader Rutherford sent out a tweet. It's just going back and forth. I love this. "I don't want Mia McLeod's personal attacks to distract," I think he probably meant detract, but whatever, distract from her record as a legislator. "In 12 years, only 3 bills she sponsored became law. 2 of them were for commemorative license plates." Damn. Calling her out. So where's this fight going and what does it mean? Well, first of all, it means that there's a whole lot of attention on a race that the Democratic Party really didn't want anyone to know about. That benefits McLeod tremendously. Again, 6 out of 10 voters in the Democratic primary are black. So if a black candidate can get attention, can get momentum, can galvanize that vote, she's in really good shape. So a bad week for Joe Cunningham, and definitely we're going to continue to follow this story. Does it matter who wins the Democratic nomination in South Carolina? Not really. Not really. This is a state that went for Trump overwhelmingly, both in 2016 and 2020. This state has consistently elected Republicans. In fact, Democrats are so poor off in South Carolina that in order to win, they actually run as Republicans. The current state superintendent of education, for example, Molly Spearman, she's a Democrat people, but ran as a Republican, was able to win. And in fact, she's endorsed one of the candidates in the Republican race for the superintendent of education position. So again, Democrats, Joe Cunningham, for example, well, just run as a Republican, dog. Just run as a Republican. Anyway, but this wasn't the only race that we were following this week. There was a ton of political action this week. I want to go down now to Kershaw County, South Carolina. And this is a story. This is a story that it actually is a 4-year-old story because there's a guy running for county council in Kershaw County. His name is Brant Tomlinson, right? This guy ran for county council 4 years ago, got beat. And the reason he got beat is that a month before the election, this photo appeared. Yeah, that's a guy wearing blackface. And apparently it's a movie called Cool Runnings, 1993 Disney joint about the Jamaican bobsled team. I've heard it's a great movie. I haven't seen it. But Tomlinson apparently liked this movie quite a bit and thought it would be a good idea to put blackface all over him. And let's talk about blackface for a minute, because there was a huge scandal up in Virginia a couple years ago. Both the former governor and former attorney general of Virginia, Democrats, were busted wearing blackface in old photos, caused a huge scandal. Neither of them lost their job, although ironically, Megyn Kelly, the conservative, whatever, NBC commentator, she lost her job for not condemning blackface sufficiently. Now, let's talk a minute about blackface. I'm about as dumb as they come when it comes to political stuff, okay? I will say anything. I will do anything. I have no filter, okay? I get my mouth gets me in trouble all the time. I do stupid stuff literally all the time. All the time, at work, at home. I'm just an idiot. Even I am not stupid enough to put blackface on. In fact, we joked before the set, well, wouldn't it be funny if maybe we put blackface on to joke about Hell no. Hell no. I'm not that stupid. So the fact this guy pulled this off 4 years ago, anyway. So is Tomlinson going to win? I don't know. Here's the question. He ran 4 years ago. He almost won 4 years ago despite his blackface scandal. And I guess there's no education in the second kick of a mule because he's running again. We will be very interested in following this race. By the way, I never thought I would be interested in following a Kershaw County local election race, but here it is. We've got a blackface scandal. And a reminder for candidates out there, don't be that stupid. Don't be that stupid. All right. Also in political news, I want to talk briefly about the South Carolina 1st Congressional District, because this is a race more than any other race that's going to have a big impact on national politics. For those of you who aren't familiar, former U.S. President Donald Trump, who, by the way, is running for president again. Can we just go ahead and dispense with the speculation on that? The man's running. So this is a race that Trump is heavily invested in. Now, there's 2 congressional races that Trump has gotten involved in here in South Carolina. The 7th District, which is up in Horry County, Myrtle Beach, the tourism mecca area. But this race is the Charleston area, the Charleston, South Carolina, Beaufort County, the low country of the Palmetto State. Trump's gotten involved in both of these races against the incumbents. He is targeting Representative Tom Rice up in the 7th District, and he's targeting Representative Nancy Mace in the 1st District. The reason? Rice was one of only 10 Republicans who voted to impeach Trump back in January of 2021 in the aftermath of the rioting at the U.S. Capitol. So Trump is after him. Mace also didn't vote to impeach Trump, but she was harshly critical of the former president in the aftermath of those riots. And so he's after both of them. Now, the races are interesting because in the 7th District up the coast, Rice is going to get beat, folks. That race is pretty much decided. barring some massive influx of Democratic turnout, Rice is going to lose that seat. He's going to lose his election. So Trump's going to have a scalp he can nail up on the wall. So the real action is in the 1st District. And that's a race where we've seen a ton of money spent. We've got mailings, dozens of mailings. We've got dozens of television ads from the campaigns, from the special interest groups. Nancy Mace and her opponent, Katie Arrington, who's been endorsed by Trump, they are just going at it, people. And these two hated each other to begin with. So the fact that they're just eviscerating each other on television every day shouldn't come as a surprise. But this race could be close. In fact, we exclusively reported last week on some polling that showed that Mace had only a 5 percentage point lead over Arrington in this contest. Now, she insists that her lead is much bigger. Nancy Mace does. However, the race doesn't really have that feel. It feels close. It feels like, particularly in a low turnout election, that the Trump MAGA crowd could pull off an upset here. But as this race heads to the finish line, there's a question that I asked that I think is incredibly important. Back in April, Katie Arrington, the Trump-endorsed challenger, she put $500,000 of her own money, or her husband's money, we'll call it what it is, into this race, okay? Now, has she spent it? As of the most recent election report, the answer to that question is no. As of May 25th, she had not spent a dime of her own money. Now, will she? We don't know. We've got one last pre-election report before this race, before voters go to the polls next Tuesday. So it'll be very interesting to see whether she spends that money because, folks, in a close race like this, that $500,000 could be the difference between victory and defeat for Katie Arrington and victory and defeat for Donald Trump. And again, Trump needs to win this race. If he's going to come into South Carolina in 2024 as a candidate for president and look for that incredibly pivotal South Carolina victory, he needs a show of strength in the 1st District in 2022. So we're going to follow that race very closely. Other political action, well, there's a ton of it. We've covered it from Berkeley County, Beaufort County in the Low Country to Greenville, Spartanburg up in the upstate. Ton of political news. Check out FITSNews.com for the latest on that as we head into our next segment. All right, so for those of you who caught last week's episode, we had an in-studio interview with Eric Bland and Ronnie Richter, who are two of the top attorneys in the Murdaugh murders, crime, and corruption saga. In fact, they're two of the attorneys who got the ball rolling on this case, particularly on the civil side. So we had a huge discussion with Eric and Ronnie. Great feedback, great response. And one of the things I thought was most interesting about that was the speculation about the timing of indictments. Because when Eric and Ronnie were in the studio, we were days away from the first anniversary of the Mizell homicide, which is, again, the seminal moment of this whole saga. It's when 52-year-old Maggie Murdaugh, who's the wife of Alec Murdaugh, the disgraced attorney who's at the heart of this thing, and their son, 22-year-old Paul Murdaugh, were brutally murdered, savagely murdered at the hunting property that's owned by this powerful family. So June 7 was a big day, and it came and went without indictments. And a lot of people were surprised. There are a lot of stories out there. All the mainstream media outlets did their typical 1 year, what's happening. This news outlet obviously had some more important news. We were continuing to dig on this case, on the evidence that investigators are accumulating. So we published a big report about video evidence that was found on the cell phone of Paul Murdaugh that's related to the alibi of Alec Murdaugh and what he told investigators, or what he's alleged to have told investigators. So Alec Murdaugh had a story for what his movements were prior to the murders. He said he was not on certain parts of the Mizell property at certain times. Turns out, according to this video evidence, though, he was. So you take that, and then you add that to the exclusive reporting this news outlet has previously done about the high-velocity impact spatter that's reportedly been found on items of his clothing. So I think we all kind of know where this is headed. I think we all kind of know who's going to be indicted, right? Question is when. Question is when. And so when June 7 came and went, this was basically the third week in a row that there had been huge buzz. And I'm talking from sources, even sources close to the Murdaugh family who spoke to us, who indicated that they believed his indictment on murder charges was imminent. Well, June 7 came and went, folks, and no indictments. And so we're left with the question, when is this going to happen? Honestly, how much more time do investigators need? So there was some speculation this week that I addressed in a lengthy post. A lot of it was on Reddit, which, by the way, I'm told is is read by people who don't get out much, who don't see the sun very much. I don't know. I went on it. It seemed cool to me, but, I do have a dorky side, so maybe I geeked out a little bit when I visited that page. But there are apparently these communities called subreddits or something. I don't know. It sounds Farsi to me. It sounds like speaking Farsi. Subreddit. That's Indian. That's not a very good Indian person. Man, I'm going to get in trouble for that. I'm about as dumb as they come when it comes to political stuff, okay? I will say anything. I will do anything. I have no filter, okay? I get my mouth gets me in trouble all the time. I do stupid stuff literally all the time. All the time, at work, at home. I'm just an idiot. Anyway, I'll stop insulting cultures en masse, but here's the deal. On this page, there was a ton of speculation about the political interference or the political meddling or the political motivation in the Murdaugh murders, crime and corruption saga. Particularly, people are saying, these indictments are being held back for political purposes ahead of the June 14 election. So obviously June 7, a week ahead of June 14. I think I was educated in a government-run school in South Carolina. I think that math is right. So yeah. But is that true? And a lot of people asked me about it. A lot of credible people, news organizations said, hey, is the Attorney General of South Carolina deliberately holding these indictments for political gain? And so I did a column on that because it's a very important question. It's a very interesting question. And the answer is no. The answer is no. The Attorney General of South Carolina is not delaying indictments for political purposes. And let me tell you why. Because there's no political pressure at all on the Attorney General of South Carolina. This is a guy who's won election 3 times already. He's running for a fourth term. He has no Democratic opponent, like literally no Democrat ran against him. And the Republican challenger he drew is well, I like her, but she's just not a credible opponent in terms of money, in terms of name recognition, or frankly in terms of the policy agenda that she put forward. So basically a weak opponent in the Republican primary who he's going to trounce, and then no opponent in the Democratic, in the general election. So where's the political pressure? I don't get it. And by the way, if you were going to do this for political benefit, you would do it a week before the election, right? If you're the Attorney General of South Carolina and you are worried about your political standing, you would drop these indictments 1 week before the election on the 1-year anniversary of the murders. You would get a huge spike in media. You would get a huge boost at the polls. But the Attorney General didn't do that. So why? I haven't had a lot of conversations with the AG, but I did have one conversation with him several weeks ago, and he made a comment to me about another case that I found was interesting. And I've heard this. I've heard his assistant AGs and deputy AGs say this to me as well, that he often says, I'm going to measure twice and cut once. Measure twice and cut once. And I think that's important, folks, particularly in a case like this. And I think that's not just a figure of speech either, because if you look at some of the key evidence in this case, for instance, the high-velocity impact spatter I just spoke about, that wasn't just tested here in South Carolina by the SLED laboratory, okay? That evidence was also sent out of state to be tested because they want to, again, measure twice, cut once. And they know that there are some pretty good attorneys who are representing Alec Murdaugh, although, let's be honest, I haven't seen much from them at this point to indicate. I keep hearing how good they are, but my God, Dick Harpootlian and Jim Griffin, Harpoot, or whatever, Harpgriff, whatever you want to call this non-dynamic duo. I mean, talk about making a mess of this case. I mean, if you want a lawyer who's going to go on national television and admit that you stole tens of millions of dollars from people to subsidize an opioid addiction that, as Eric Plant said, would kill 3 elephants, yeah, that's a lot of oxy, right? But anyway, they're supposed to be good lawyers. I haven't seen it yet. And maybe they're being so bad so that their excuse down the road is that they gave, he had terrible representation. Maybe that's their plan, is to just screw the pooch badly enough that a judge says, yeah, you had terrible lawyers, dude. Anyway, we'll find that out down the road. But speaking of those lawyers, there's another Murdaugh issue that cropped up this week that I wanted to talk about. And our executive editor, Liz Farrell, did a great story on this. And I'm talking about the jailhouse calls, the tapes that have been released early on in this process, but Alec Murdaugh's lawyers Dick Harpootlian and Jim Griffin filed a suit in federal court to block the release of any future calls. Now, did they have a good case for that? Did they have should his jailhouse tape calls be released? Well, yeah. And in fact, Richland County acknowledged that when they released them. They acknowledged that these are public records. They are subject to the Freedom of Information Act. They should be released. Griffin and Harpootlian challenged that in federal court. And guess what, folks? This week, they lost. Federal judge ruled that those tapes can be released by the county. And so we are expecting the next round of jailhouse calls to be released very soon. Obviously, FITSNews exclusively reported on the first round of those calls, along with the Murdaugh Murders podcast. Mandy Matney and Liz Farrell did an amazing job on that program. So we're looking forward to getting the next round of those calls so that the podcast and FITSNews can give you the latest news and analysis on it. But we learned a lot from the last round, folks. We learned a lot about Alec Murdaugh, kind of who he is, the way he operates, the fact he was still kind of running scams behind bars. It's almost like he's addicted to that action, addicted to that, feeling that you get when you're pulling something off or think you're pulling something off. But again, the scams Alec Murdaugh has pulled off over the years have cost a lot of people a lot of money. He has victimized, allegedly, a ton of people to the tune of, again, nearly $9 million, allegedly stolen from some of the poorest, most vulnerable people you can imagine. So, yeah, I do think we deserve a window into the kind of mind that would perpetrate those kind of scams, which, again, have not only implicated Alec Murdaugh, but we've got a ton of co-defendants, bankers, other attorneys. We've got potentially judges involved in this because it was a systemic thing, people. It wasn't just one guy. He had a lot of help. So those calls provide invaluable insights into the mindset of Alec Murdaugh. So we look forward to getting and reporting on the next round. But again, FITSNews has been the tip of the spear when it comes to all Murdaugh-related news. So count on us to continue providing the very latest on every facet of this case as it moves forward. All right, so last week we started off with the saga of Bowen Turner, the accused teen rapist from Orangeburg, South Carolina, whose sweetheart plea deal back in April drew national outrage. Now, this saga has continued to unfold over the last few weeks, and last week we led off our show with a story about Bowen Turner, particularly the community coddling, the accommodation and enabling of his behavior, and the bullying and the aggressive intimidation of his victims. And I pointed out in that segment something that I think bears repeating. You think people would recognize right and wrong. Okay, you think people would then do the right thing based on that recognition. But in Orangeburg, South Carolina, that did not happen because a guy who clearly had issues was coddled and enabled while the people that were victimized by him, including one who got a judgment, who the courts did find that he was guilty of criminal conduct toward, not what he should have been charged with, but an actual victim, not an alleged victim. They were bullied. They were harassed. They were intimidated. And it got so bad that one of these victims, last fall, took her own life as a result of that. So it's a bad situation, and it's one of the things that this news outlet has covered, not just because the story is news, but because there's something so much bigger here. And I hit on that last week talking about the community of Orangeburg and how it failed these victims and their families. But this week I wanted to turn our attention to the very latest in this story, which was a hearing that was held in Orangeburg this week on Bowen Turner's probation. Now, if you recall, Turner got off. He got a sweetheart plea deal, okay? He got probation for these 3 alleged sexual assaults, one of which was inexplicably pled down to a simple assault by the solicitor Bill Weeks. I want you to remember that name, guys. When he comes up for re-election, remember this guy, because he's the guy who cut this sweetheart plea deal with the sitting state senator Brad Hutto. But as we reported, Bowen Turner was caught on Mother's Day in a bar. First of all, he's not 21, shouldn't be allowed to drink, but he's in a bar, buying alcohol, gets hammered, tries to lure a girl to take him home. Okay, this guy who's been accused already of 3 sexual assaults may have been going for number 4, people. Fortunately, the employees at this bar were able to keep them separated, so to speak, barring my offspring lingo there. They were able to get Bowen Turner out of the bar, where he was discovered by an Orangeburg County deputy stumbling in the middle of the road. He was taken to the detention center under the influence, allegedly. There, he threatened to bite off the finger of a correctional institution employee and also called another correctional institution employee a bitch. So clearly a class act that we're dealing with here. But because of those charges, Turner has clearly violated his parole, which means his parole should be revoked. And that was the hearing that happened in Orangeburg this week. It was a hearing before the court and the Probation and Pardon Agency, the South Carolina Department of Probation, Parole, and Pardon Services. One of their representatives appeared and formally made the recommendation that Bowen Turner's parole be revoked, meaning his ass goes to jail. And that recommendation, by the way, was seconded by the Office of South Carolina Attorney General Alan Wilson. So that's a good deal. That's an important development in this case, and it could be at long last some actual accountability for the victims in this case. But, and this is a huge but, we still have the same systemic problems, people. We still have the same issues. We still have the same powerful lawyer legislators manipulating our system on behalf of their well-connected clients, and justice is just going to continue to be denied. There was, though, some good news on that front this week, and I want to draw attention to this. We exclusively reported on this in connection with the hearing this week on Bowen Turner's probation. His powerful lawyer, legislator, attorney, Brad Hutto, the Senate Minority Leader, a hugely influential person, not just in Orangeburg, but across the state, okay, got a top leadership position in the South Carolina Senate. Brad Hutto was nowhere to be found in the courtroom this week when Bowen Turner made his appearance for that probation revocation. In fact, Turner was represented by the public defender in this case, Jason Turnblad. That's a big deal. Now, has Hutto completely ditched Bowen Turner? We don't know that yet because, again, there are still the possibility that one of the sexual assault charges against him could be brought back up. It was dismissed by Bill Weeks again. I don't want to keep saying this guy's name, this so-called prosecutor. Keep saying his name, people. But Bill Weeks dropped that case, but he has been reviewing it based on the public pressure that he's received. Okay, and I'm told that Weeks actually met with some of the families of the victims this week, and they are continuing to press him to reconsider that absolutely terrible decision based on the evidence in that case, which clearly indicated that an assault took place. So while they reconsider that case, it remains to be seen, will Brad Hutto continue to represent Bowen Turner on that charge, or has he completely washed his hands of this ne'er-do-well kid? It looks like the latter, but we don't know yet. We're going to continue to track that. And by the way, we have repeatedly asked Senator Hutto to comment on this case. We've opened our microphone to him. This mic is available to him anytime he wants to come on and defend the way that he has handled this case. And again, every defendant deserves the best representation they can get. I'm not ever going to argue that, man. I'm a libertarian. I believe that to my core. You are innocent until proven guilty by a jury of your peers, okay? I believe that to my core. But how you are represented matters. And Senator Hutto went out of his way to slut-shame one of the victims in this case, basically called her a whore in public, which fed that community bullying and fed that community intimidation of these victims. Just awful. But it appears Hutto has finally seen the writing on the wall and taken himself off of this case, but we will see whether he completely does that in the event that that sexual assault charge is brought back up. We will see on that. But FITSNews has been driving the train on the Bowen Turner saga. We're going to actually be covering another story similar to this in the coming days, given our treatment to that saga as well. Because again, it's not just about these stories. It's not just about these allegations, but it's about the bigger issue of holding the system accountable and making sure that those who are powerful and in positions of power do not manipulate it for the gain of their clients. All right, so our last big block today is going to focus on the issue of education, which is something this news outlet has covered extensively and quite differently from the mainstream press. The mainstream press likes to pat our failed establishment on the back, lobby for more money for them, even though we're spending $17,000 per kid per year, more than $13.5 billion on what is one of the worst government-run systems in America. Again, the outcomes just don't match the investment, people, and they never have. They never have, which is why I have consistently argued for school choice. But anyway, we're going to talk more about that in a minute. First, I want to talk about a problem that is plaguing local school boards across the state. These independently elected organizations, they're not serving the people that elected them, okay? They're serving themselves, and they're conducting their business behind closed doors. Now, last month, this news outlet exclusively reported on the abrupt resignation of a superintendent at Lexington County School District 2. The guy's name is Nicholas Wade. Name's not important. District's not important. What is important is that the conditions and the terms and the details of why Wade abruptly resigned were completely hidden from public view. And in fact, when you FOIA the file, which they have to release, by the way, what you get is a document which basically shows they are agreeing not to talk about it. That anyone who is asked about it has to say, oh, we don't know anything. We have no comment. This agreement speaks for itself. We can't say anything else. And if they do comment out of line, they're going to have to pay $20,000. Your money. Your money. Oh, and by the way, for this little agreement where everyone keeps everything hush-hush, Nicholas Wade, the superintendent that left, got $240,000, people, and $10,000 for his legal fees. That's $250,000 to keep his mouth shut. Your money that should be going into the classroom, gone on one of these golden parachutes for an educrat. Now, what did Wade do? I don't know. Again, not my district. I don't have kids there. But if I did have kids there, I'd be furious. Because this is money that should be going to their education, which is instead going to some payoff to a guy who we don't know what happened. Did he do something wrong? Does he know something was done wrong? Now, it is interesting that this district is the subject of a great inflation scandal, one that involves Brooklyn Casey High School, which is in West Columbia, South Carolina, the armpit of the state, by the way. I'm about as dumb as they come when it comes to political stuff, okay? I will say anything. Dylan's flipping me off right now because he lives in West Columbia. But seriously, folks, West Columbia, Casey, I'm sorry. I'm sorry. Maybe there's some nice parts there, but the Riverwalk is nice. I don't know. Get too far away from the Riverwalk, it gets a little sketchy. But here's the thing. Whatever you think about West Columbia, can we all agree, though, that if a guy is getting paid $240,000 to do nothing for the next 2 years, again, add the legal fees, it's $250,000 to do nothing for the next 2 years. Shouldn't we know what happened? Shouldn't we know why he's getting that money? But this happens all the time at these school boards and county councils. They go in executive session, which is basically code for smoky back room where we're going to do whatever the hell we want and not tell you about it. Spend huge, obscene sums of your money without telling you why. Where we're going to reward our cronies, where we're going to cover up scandals, where we're going to hide the ball, and not tell you anything about your money. Why is education such a disaster in South Carolina? Well, guess what, folks? They don't want you to know. They don't want you to know because all the important stuff, all the stuff where we could be holding people accountable, they do behind closed doors. I've called for years to get rid of executive session people. I don't believe that we should release the Social Security numbers of our teachers and our administrators, but folks, there's not a lot else that I think we should keep secret. If you are getting paid with tax money, if you are using taxpayer resources, if you are doing something on taxpayer time, guess what, folks? It's the taxpayer's business, particularly if it's something wrong, particularly if it's something scandalous, particularly if it's something like a great inflation scandal, okay, where you're promoting people that don't deserve it, which is allegedly what's happened within this district. So this news outlet for many months has been focused on this issue. We've had a lot of folks come into the studio. We had Steph Berquist from Lexington County who came in here railing on some of the injustices and some of the scams in her district. And we're going to keep the pressure up, people, because it's not just the Midlands. It's all over the state. This stuff is happening all over the state, and they are stealing your money to reward their friends with these crony contracts. They're getting caught. They're firing people, not telling you what happened to get rid of them, buying people's silence with your tax money. That is not an investment in education. So when you see those license plates, those public education, a great investment, when you see those license plates, you remember this scandal. And you remember the countless of other scandals like it where your money is being used to buy people's silence to cover up scandals. That's unacceptable, and this news outlet will continue to fight against it while the mainstream media is silent. All right, well, that's a wrap for this week's edition. But before we go, I wanted to do something that I absolutely love to do, which is dip my hand into the mailbag, which is actually my phone, where I've copied and pasted some of the fun messages that we've received over the last couple days. But I love this. This is my favorite. I hate, just having one voice. I like having a lot of voices. So when people write in, whether it's good, bad, indifferent, insulting, angry, I like to share it. So let's go to the mailbag. Okay, this one was sent by a Florida resident, it looks like. But he says, I just drove my very expensive motor coach on the roads of South Carolina. Had to spend $800 on fuel. Never again. I will avoid South Carolina and these roads at all costs in the future. South Carolina's roads are an embarrassment. My overhead motorized sun visor came crashing down due to the rough roads. Could have caused an accident since it fell on the driver's side windshield dash area and partially blocked my view of the road. That's it for me. No more patronage of South Carolina businesses. No more tearing up my motor coach on South Carolina's very poor roads. Pass this message on to those who care about the reputation of South Carolina. Well, I think if this gentleman looked in the rearview mirror of his motor coach, he would probably see the reputation of South Carolina way, way in the back. But anyway, he raises a very good point. About 3 years ago, I ran a column entitled Interstate 95, a National Embarrassment. And this is just one of several roads that is, main arteries, main transportation arteries that our state relies on, not just the citizens here, but people traveling through. They rely on these roads. Interstate 85 last year wrote a big series how it was a death trap. Even a local official even called it a death trap. Why do we have these problems? I'll tell you why. Because our politicians would rather spend money on crony capitalist deals for Volvo, for the Carolina Panthers, who, by the way, aren't even coming, but they get a multi-million-dollar interchange, until we prioritize infrastructure in this state by putting key projects first, projects with a real public need, not these political roads to nowhere, interchanges to nowhere. Until we do that, we're going to continue to see this kind of deplorable road conditions. Now, next letter comes from a Mike S., and he's responding to a story we did earlier this week on a South Carolina pastor's arrest in the upstate not making the news. So, Mike S. says, I find it interesting in this article that you managed to bring up Shandon Baptist Church. You basically said you didn't have time to follow up and finish that story due to the Murdaugh saga. Yet you've managed to report on numerous other stories and have even added staff. Just a thought. If you have something, report on it. If not, move on. Mike S. Testy, but I like it. I like it, Mike S. You raise a good point. You're right. You're right. I'll give you that, Mike S. All right, next up we have, this is a fan letter. I like this letter. This is a happygram. P. The letter starts. Literally P-P-P-P. I wonder where that's at. Can y'all say Pulitzer? I live just down the road from this hairy root ball of a Murdaugh case. Having met Alex's brother and his two boys in a convenience store once while Alex was so high he was banging on the counters and damn near doing ballerina spins, I didn't know who he was, nor did I care. I just wanted him to leave. I have several friends from hunting and law enforcement that drank the Moselle wine, so yeah, we talk about this mess. I bet. I just want to say thank you to you and your team with the out-front research and originality you have all brought to our place at the bottom of the South Carolina Dorito chip. Same goes with your strive to balance the good old boy network. With your strive to balance, I guess he meant to, I don't know what he meant, but anyway, pass along to your team my sincerest respect and thanks. Well, thank you, good sir. Last letter I wanted to read, it's Dear Mr. Folks, I would like to begin by saying how much I enjoy listening to the subject content of your podcast. It is truly refreshing to hear news reported in such an honest and transparent fashion for a change. Yeah, I like this. Wait a minute. At the same time, I would just like to say that your tone and arrogance can be very off-putting at times. Wait a minute. Where's this letter going? Remember that Alec Murdaugh and those who fell from grace before him had a very similar holier-than-thou attitude. I say this because I wish you the very best and every success. I hope that you will take a bite out of some humble pie and remember that to those who are given much, much is expected. Be a good steward of your platform and make us proud. Wishing you every happiness. And that's from a reader named Donna. Actually, Donna, I like that. I appreciate that. And that is a good reminder because every one of us is one slip away from a major pooch screw, people. So I like that, Donna. Thank you. Folks, we love hearing from you, whether it's good, whether it's bad. We want to hear from you. This microphone is your microphone. FITSNews has an open microphone policy at all times. So in addition to the news that we cover, the stories that we break, the debates that we try to drive, we also want you to drive those debates and tell us when we're wrong. Tell us when we get something wrong. Tell us when we miss something. We want to hear from you, and we want your honest feedback, even if it's critical. So I'm going to hopefully dip back into the mailbag more as the Week in Review continues to evolve. I think it's a great feature, and I'm always grateful to hear from our viewers. That's it for this edition. Look forward to catching you next week on the Week in Review.